welcome Joe Gripe, Arborist of the Year, with our virtual tree walk, Buds and Blooms.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Gripe. I'm the director of the Arboretum at Meadow Lakes. It's a beautiful day out and I wanted to show you some of the blooms that we have and some of the buds on trees that are about to bloom. So first we're going to take a look at a Yoshino cherry. They're covered with these beautiful blooms. They're a whitish pink color. The bees are flying around. They seem to be enjoying them. It's not a very fragrant tree, but the blossom and floral display is really impressive this time of the year. Usually cherries bloom for about 2 weeks in the spring and then don't do too much else, although they do have really attractive bark. These two cherry trees are the same. Again, they're Yoshino cherries, Prunus guyodensis. And they're just covered in these beautiful blooms. So I'd encourage you to get out and take a look, take a walk around. They're blooming right now. It's April 8th. We'll probably have another week or so to go on this one. But before we go on, I'll just point out some interesting striations on the bark. These horizontal marks we believe are for gas exchange. It's somewhat unique to cherries. They're called lenticels, and they're always in these horizontal patterns. Again, something kind of unique to cherries. It gives them some more, some interest year-round. We'll take a look at another tree next. Okay, so another tree that I thought might be interesting to look at this time of year, again it's April 8th now, is this sawtooth oak. We often think of oaks as having their leaves, holding their leaves through the winter. That's often not the case. A lot of times the more common pin oaks, we'll see them hold their leaves for a long time, but they'll slowly lose them through the winter. And by February or March, most will be gone. Other trees have this characteristic where they hold them almost until the new buds start to expand. That characteristic is called marcescence. So this tree is marcescent. It's holding its leaves, and it's actually a little nicer to deal with because if the trees are constantly dropping their leaves all through the winter, it makes a mess around your front door. We're typically not out cleaning and blowing leaves in January, February. But if a tree holds on to them until you start cutting the grass again, well, that makes for an easier cleanup. So sawtooth oak is distinguished by these little bristle tips on the margin of the leaf. And as the breeze is blowing behind me, I hope you can hear the rustling of the leaves. It's an interesting added benefit of this tree. The leaves are almost papery. You hear them rustle through the winter. It can be very nice. Some people don't like this look at all. So either you like it or you don't. Hopefully at least you can just appreciate that this is something a little different in nature. One other thing I'll point out to you is the caps from the acorns are also very interesting. They have these kind of wild little projections off of them that are pretty unique. So this is the cap. The acorn would have extended down about this far on it. So it is a native but somewhat rare tree. The leaves are somewhat like willow oak, only a little bit bigger, and again, bristle-tipped. This is sawtooth oak, Quercus acutissima. Okay, so here we are on the side of the guest house. This is the back of what would have been the garage or carriage house, I suppose, of the guest house. We've got 3 crab apples that have been espaliered on against the wall. That's a special pruning technique that isn't often used anymore. It requires constant attention. It's really labor intensive, but you do it to keep something trained up against the wall or a flat surface. I wanted to point this out though for a couple of reasons. First of all, crab apples are really tough trees. It's one tree that you can really do this to without really harming it too much, or at least they're very tolerant of it. The second thing is, since we're talking about buds and blooms, I wanted to point out how the difference between the buds that are opening and the open flowers. So I always thought this was interesting. The buds are, as they're opening, are much darker. You're seeing the back side of the petals, and as they're opening, they're a much darker, kind of rosy color. And then they open up to this beautiful light pink color that I think is very attractive. So you might just walk by them and not really notice them, but pay sometimes to take a look and see these buds opening and see how they mature over a matter of just several days even. That's it. All right, so here's another tree, a beautiful flowering tree. This is one of the magnolias. Magnolias have been hybridized to the nth degree. There are probably over 1,000 different hybrids that have been created just for different floral displays. This one is called Magnolia Daybreak, and its parents actually are different hybrids too, so the lineage is a little complex. It's got a nice, attractive steel gray bark. It's very smooth. This is a low-branched tree, so we're looking for those nice trunks coming up as part of its architecture. The blooms are anywhere from 8 to 10 inches across. They start with these petals that are like a deep pink or light purple color, and they open to this beautiful light pink flower on the inside. This particular tree has been experiencing a microclimate that's very different from another that we'll show you toward the end here. They're two exactly the same trees, so genetically exactly the same plant material. But this one has a microclimate where it's protected not only by about a 5-foot overhang on the roof, it's also experiencing a lot of reflected light and heat from the building. So this one always opens a little earlier. So even though it's genetically exactly the same plant, this one starts a little earlier just because it's a little warmer, as doesn't experience quite the cold weather that the other one does, where it's exposed to a little bit more winter wind. So we'll take a walk over and show you where the other one is, just so you can keep an eye out for it. Just to the west of Building 16, parking lot 4B. This is the other one. It's just a little slower, a little further behind. So again, genetically exactly the same plant. This one just happens to be a little further along. This one will be delayed by about a week to a week and a half. It is now April 17th, 2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're bringing the trees to you. We're going to do another series on buds and blooms. First, we're going to take a look at this Ohio buckeye, or yellow buckeye. It's a pretty rare tree. It is native to this area, but again, pretty rare. It has palmately compound leaves, interesting bark, and I wanted to point out before we look up further into the tree some of the lichens that are down here. This is the pattern of growth that's on the outside of the bark. We often get questions about that. People wonder if they're affecting the tree in some way, negatively or otherwise. And the tree is really just a host for this organism or combination of organisms to reside. So they're not pulling anything from the tree. It's actually a combination of an algae and a blue-green algae and a fungus coexisting together that make these formations. Some of them project out from the trunk a bit, and the one thing that it does indicate is good air quality. You'll never see these in cities or where there's a lot of air pollution. So when you see them, just know that you have pretty good air quality. Then we'll take a look up higher in the canopy now, and I'll show you some of the emerging leaves from the buds that have swollen. You can see they're elongating. These are the bud scales here, and the leaves that are inside the bud that are expanding and pushing open that bud. Then a little further back, I'll show you a little further along where some of the leaves have come out more fully. They're starting to develop. Again, it's palmately compound. And then we've got a developing flower head here. This will turn into a yellow upright flower cluster about that large on the tree. It's pretty unique to the tree, so they'll be blooming in another several weeks or so. So that's it, the yellow buckeye or Ohio buckeye. Okay, next we're going to take a look at the eastern redbud. This is a tree that you might not see too often, this particular tree anyway. It's in the back corner between Sea Wing and Meadowside, right along the hallway, an interior hallway. Eastern redbuds are native to this area. not a very long-lived tree. They usually go about 30 to 40 years. They have some problems with decay and some inherent problems that cause an earlier demise. But they do have a really beautiful floral display. And one of the things that makes them so impactful is that they bloom before the leaves emerge. So we talked about that before on another tree we saw earlier. But I wanted to point out how, first of all, the distinct color of the flowers, then also how they're borne along the stems. So you get these delicate sprays of purple flowers along the stems. There's a tremendous amount of genetic diversity within the species, though. So if you were to grow them from seed, most of the trees would look wildly different. So you'd have some with different colored leaves, different growth patterns, even different colors of flowers. So nursery owners have taken some of the more interesting cultivars and bred them or propagated them asexually to keep those traits and then named them. So you see in the nursery tray a lot of different cultivars of this tree. It does have a nice form, and you'll see also there's some flower buds even breaking out along some of the older trunks. That's also pretty unique. The flowers are quite small, but they're so prolific, and again, they're born on the tree before the leaves emerge, so they are a little more impactful. The bark is usually pretty dark. It's a handsome bark. Again, not terribly long-lived, but a handsome, young, smaller, native flowering tree. All right, next we'll take a look at some pines. They also are having their buds elongate now. You can see these, we actually call these candles. So this is in the candling stage of growth for a pine. This is where this will become a new stem and new lateral branches. And then the leaves or needles will be borne along these as they extend out. So it's an interesting time of the year to see this stage. I want to point out these three trees, though. These are Tanyosho pines, or Japanese tabletop pines. It's one of my favorite trees, but they're very uncommon in the nursery trade now. They do get a fungal disease that's very difficult to treat and to care for, so you don't often see them in the trade. And they're a little difficult to grow for nurseries, so you don't normally see them. I was excited to get these. This one did have an outbreak of that fungus, but I was able to prune it out, and we were able to save it and keep it going. So that's why this one looks a little more open than the one in the back. That's a little fuller and a little more bushy. And then we had one that we lost, so we replaced it with another from the same nursery. So the smaller one over here. But they're all the same. Japanese tabletop pine or Tanyosho pine. Generally a smaller, flat-topped pine, but they do have very handsome exfoliating bark and a really nice form as they grow and mature. That's it. Okay, next we're going to take a look at a Japanese maple. This is a Japanese maple that was grown from seed. These are prolific seeders and can be a little invasive, but normally the trees that come from seed aren't cold hardy. This is one we found in a nurseryman's field nearby, and it was growing off on its own out on the edge of the woods. And we had just gone through two really exceptionally cold winters, and the tree did just fine, and it had a pretty tough exposure, so I knew that it was safe to use. It is a normal green-leafed Japanese maple, where some of them, the more popular varieties, have a burgundy leaf. This has a really exceptional fall color. So I wanted to point out, since everything is just emerging now, you can see some of the old bud scales that are red. It might be a little difficult to see them, but then the newly emerging leaves are very soft and delicate right now. They will be getting larger and fuller. And then we also have the little flowers in red. So the bud scales and leaf scales were red, the leaves are emerging green, and the flowers have this nice burgundy color. What also is really interesting about this tree is just its beautiful form. It's got this really interesting willowy architecture to it. I think it's really graceful and really caught my eye when I first saw it. So I'm glad we were able to get it transplanted here. It's in a pretty prominent location, so a lot of residents get to see it. This is just opposite the meeting room. So there's a lot of traffic in the hallway where people get to admire the tree. So Japanese maple. Okay, the next tree we'll talk about is a pond cypress. This is a really close relative to our bald cypresses that we have primarily around the lakes. This is a lesser known tree, though maybe just as good. The Latin name is Taxodium ascendens, primarily because the leaves, when they're first forming, ascend. So you can see how they're just starting to come out now. It's really interesting. Very similar to the 3 dwarf bald cypresses that we have just outside the cafe, out by the Whirligig, out those windows there. We get a lot of comments about, or questions about those trees every spring. This is a deciduous conifer, so it loses its leaves in the fall, but bears cones. So conifer and evergreen is not synonymous. Probably not the best location for this one, just because it's right, you see it as you're exiting parking lot 9, and every fall I get phone calls that this tree has died. It hasn't died, it's just shedding its leaves. It's supposed to do that. Really nice form to it, nice straight central trunk, central leader, and a handsome tree, really tolerant of a lot of poor soils and air pollution too. So a tough, durable tree. Pond cypress. Okay, next we'll talk about some daffodils. We get a lot of compliments this time of year for daffodils. They're one of those frustrating plants that when you're thinking about daffodils, you can't plant them. You really have to plant them in the fall, and you're not going to get the benefit of them until the spring. But normally when we plant daffodils, we go with the perennializing type. So they're a much larger bulb, and maybe not quite as beautiful, but they're going to be around for many years to come. So they can really get established and build up big, healthy bulbs to give you a nice floral display year after year. We're in an area now at the south end of building 42 and 41, and we've got large sweeps of daffodils here. But I just wanted to point out how different they can be. Even though we're looking for the same kind of strong perennializing bulbs, there's a tremendous amount of diversity within them. And maybe it would be worth it to, the next time you're out walking, to stop by and just take a look at some of the different types there are. So the center part can be a darker color. Some you might see are orange with a yellow outer. The petals on the outside are lighter. Some are a little more delicate. This is the reverse, where the inside part is light and the outside is dark. There's any number of different types and styles in here. Some that are really bright yellow. They really stand out. Then a more peach tone on the inside. And we just happen to notice this one in a group of different ones that looks to be a double, with lots and lots of petals with some dark orange parts inside there. So lots of different things, to styles and types to admire in this area. So here we are at the south end of building 42, and I just wanted to point out all of the beautiful colors and textures that exist in this planting on both sides of this sidewalk. Perimeter Road is to the rear of the camera, and we're looking northward now. So we've got different leaf types. We've got needles and scales and leaves. We've got an espalier form of pyracantha up against the wall, blue spruce, weeping red-leafed Japanese maple, then 2 hollies. They're dragon lady hollies flanking the door. Then on the other side, a green-leafed Japanese holly, and below it is a very handsome stone wall. That's stone that was brought down from the Adirondacks. Then before we did talk about the eastern red buds and how they can be very different, and nursery owners will take cuttings to promote a different either characteristic, a flower type or leaf color or growing form. Off to the right here you can see 2 white flowered red buds, but you can see their form is really weak. So they're very interesting in that they're white flowered red buds, but the form is kind of rough and they really require a lot of space. We continue to prune them up. They still just want to flop over, and they're more shrubby than they are a proper tree. So I just wanted to point that out. All right, so we've got another maple hailing from Japan. This is not a true Japanese maple by common name. This is full moon maple, Acer palmatum. It's got a larger, rounded leaf. It's a little thicker and really handsome form. This also has exquisite fall color and really interesting architecture. It's interesting now to see these leaves starting to form. See them a little further along, the shape of the leaf, and again the flowers underneath it will, that's where the little helicopters or schizocarps will be formed. So interesting contrast though between the dark ruby flowers and the light green leaves. And down below we've got a planting of hellebores, that's Lenten rose. This is a little bit more of a subtle form. The flower blooms usually for several months. This particular one is a little bit darker. You kind of have to look for it, but it's a very beautiful flower, and it is a perennial. We're using it here as a ground cover. And lastly, we've got a dwarf American holly off on the side here. That's incredibly slow growing. Usually doesn't get to be more than 2.5 or 3 feet, and a very slow growing dwarf version of our native American holly.